Okay. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. Whoever's watching this on the recorded on YouTube, you'll enjoy it very much. It's always good to start any Torah learning with some tzedakah, some charity giving. We're going to do a little charity. You take a coin, put it in the box, pass it on.
Can I put two in?
You can put two in, sure. Double mitzvah. Class tonight does not yet have a sponsor. If anyone would like to sponsor, it's a big mitzvah, and all the Torah learning will be in your merit, and you'll be able to sponsor this delicious food for the people who are coming. Okay, tonight is a bomb class. It's going to be fantastic. I'm very excited about it. Let's get right into it. Choosing wisely, as it says on the cover. Idolatry seems primitive and ludicrous. Why are the Jewish people called wise on account of their choice to serve God? A fascinating discussion about the complexities of life and the courage to choose right. Okay. A quick introduction. A mimer. Mimer, it's a Hebrew word. In English, it's translated usually as a Hasidic discourse. A Hasidic discourse. A mimer is a Torah sermon delivered or written by one of the Chabad Rebbes, expounding on a deep topic within Hasidic philosophy, based on the Kabbalah and giving deep insight into our service of God. A mimer, a Hasidic discourse, is considered holier than other lectures of the Rebbe. As a result, it is referred to as Divrei Elokim Chaim, words of the living God. Stephen, you came just on time. We're just have a short introduction. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Oh, thank you. A mimer generally opens with a verse from the Torah or a saying from the sages of the Talmud, and from there it expands to explaining a subject or concept in Hasidic thought. The ma'amarim, or the discourses said by the Rebbes, were delivered with a special ceremony. First, the Hasidim sang a Hasidic melody, known as a nigun, reserved for the occasion, and during the recital of the discourse, the Hasidim would remain standing out of respect. There's a special tune that sung before this kind of thing was that that was the beginning of it. The mimer was recited in a special tune. The tradition among Hasidim is that when a Rebbe recites a mimer, they are in a state of, is a quote from the Talmud, the divine speaking through them. And when they spoke, they were in another place, a loftier plane. In tonight's class, we will take on a challenge in honor of the month of Nissan, the Jewish month of Nissan, which we're starting tonight, actually, and the Rebbe's birthday, the Lubavitcher Rebbe's birthday, to study sections of a mimer known as B'yom Ashtei Asar, on the 11th day, which the Rebbe delivered on the 11th day of Nissan, 1971, on his 69th birthday. The 11th of Nissan is the Rebbe's birthday. Very special day, very important day. And tonight's class we're gonna go through this mimer, this discourse. It's gonna be a regular kind of class. I will tell you right off the bat, we're not gonna learn the entire thing, meaning what you see here is less than what is actually the original discourse. Just want to see quickly if somebody's saying that they're on their way, looks like. Oh, okay, never mind. Okay. Section A. This is page 3 in your curriculum book. 12 days of festivities. So in order to understand the beginning of how we're going to get to this discussion, this just needs some background. Dedicating the Mishkan. 50 days after leaving Egypt, the Jews received the 10 Commandments with great pomp and ceremony. Unfortunately, just 40 days later, the sin of the golden calf happened. As a result, Moses broke the tablets and the Jews were devastated by their fateful mistake. For 80 days, Moses worked hard to gain God's forgiveness for the Jewish people. And God forgave them, giving Moses a new set of tablets. This time, there was no celebration, no thundering sounds and lightning, and the nation didn't assemble at the mountain. God gave Moses these tablets privately. We can imagine the way the Jews felt. They lost out. They were guilty. Right after, Moses told them about a new campaign, a new mitzvah that he received from God, to build him a Mishkan where he could rest. This command changed the atmosphere completely. The Jewish people saw another chance to bring God's presence among them, and they eagerly involved themselves in the new mitzvah. They donated all the necessary supplies, gold, silver, copper, and so on, giving even more than what was needed, until Moses had to simply tell them to stop. Too much. A team of craftsmen was assembled to build the Mishkan, and for 6 months, all the Jews lived and breathed this project. They donated to the Mishkan, helped with its construction, and waited and watched for it to finally be completed, for God to finally rest his presence among them. The historic dedication took place on the first day of the month of Nissan, which is actually the night. Moses consecrated the Mishkan. Aaron, the high priest, and his sons offered sacrifices, and a heavenly fire descended and consumed the sacrifices before the entire nation. More than 1 million men, women, and children. This demonstrated that the divine presence rested among the Jewish people. For 12 days following, the Jews celebrated the dedication of the Mishkan. Every day, the chief or the leader of another tribe brought a sacrifice. On the first day, Nachshon, the son of Aminadav of the tribe of Judah, brought his offering. On the second day, Nissan, the son of Tzuar of the tribe of Yisachar, brought his offering, and so on. These days were greatly cherished by the nation and were established as eternal holidays, basically for the next 12 days. Until today, the Tachanun prayer of supplications aren't recited during the month of Nisan because the days of the Mishkan's dedications are holidays. Okay, so let's see inside the one of those days where the leaders of the tribes were offering their sacrifices. And the mimer is going to segue from there. Okay, so let's see source 1. This is Numbers chapter 7, verse 1, verse 11, and verses 72 through 77. It's the longest chapter in the Torah. In fact, it's the longest Torah portion because of this, as we'll see in a minute. Stephen, can you read source 1 on page 3? I think you're muted, Stephen. Can't hear you. No? Okay, we can get back to you. It's fine. Michael, can you read the source 1?
When Moses finished setting up the Mishkan, he anointed and consecrated it and all its furnishings. He also anointed and consecrated the altar and all its utensils.
Go on.
God said to Moses, each day, one tribal chief is to bring his offering for the dedication of the altar. On the 11th day,
Pagiel,
son of Okran, the chief of the people of Asher, brought his offering. His offering was one of silver plate weighing 130 shekels and one silver sprinkling bowl weighing 70 shekels, both according to the sanctuary shekel, each filled with the finest flour mixed with olive oil as a grain offering. One gold dish weighing 10 shekels filled with incense, one young bull, one ram, and a male lamb a year old for burnt offering, a male goat for a sin offering, and 2 oxen, 5 rams, 5 male goats, and 5 male lambs a year old to be sacrificed as a fellowship offering. This was the offering of Pagiel, son of Okran.
Perfect. Thank you, Michael. So like I said, this is the longest Torah portion in the entire Torah portion of Naso. For this very reason that each of the leaders of the 12 tribes, there's 12 tribes, there's Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, Zevulun, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Yosef, and Binyamin. Well, Yosef is divided to 2 tribes, Menashe and Ephraim, and we have, so each leader of each tribe brought a whole bunch of sacrifices in honor of the dedication of the Mishkan, it's essentially the original temple. And the Torah says that the first one, Nachshon, the son of Aminadav from the tribe of Judah, brought this and this and this and this and this, and each this weighing, as Michael just read, this was weighing 10 shekels filled with incense. And then it goes the whole long description of what he brought. And you would expect to say, and the next day, the second day of Nisan, the leader of the next tribe, he brought the same as the first one. And on the third day, this leader of this tribe brought the same as the first one as well, and so on and so forth. But it doesn't do that. It goes at length saying each leader brought exactly the same stuff as sacrifices, offerings, and it goes at length repeating the same information over and over and over. It's fascinating. the Midrash learns a lot from each offering brought during those 12 days. In this class, we will focus on a Midrash about the offerings of the 11th of Nissan. Again, this is the Rebbe's birthday, brought by the tribe of Asher, as Michael just read. We just read on the 11th day, Pagiel, son of Achran, the chief of the people of Asher. Okay, so let's see what the Midrash says. The Midrash, source 2, Asher's lofty intent. This is Bamidbar Rabbah, chapter 14. Page 3, pay attention very carefully to the wording of this Midrash. It's going to be very crucial later on. Actually, okay, whatever. I'm going to confuse you otherwise, so just leave it for now. Sure, could you read source 2?
Rabbi, all the tribes were named for the Jewish people's redemption and for their praise. Asher is named for the redemption, as the verse states in Malachi 3:12. Then all the nations will call you blessed, for yours will be a delightful land. Says God Almighty. Asher is named for their praise, as the verse states. Blessed Ashrei is the people of whom this is true. Blessed Ashrei is the people whose God is the Lord. The blessing of the Jews is their choosing God to be their Lord, and God choosing them to be his chosen people. Therefore, when Asher came with his offering, he brought it thanking Hashem for choosing Israel for all the nations, as the verse states in Deuteronomy 14:2, and God chose you to be his chosen people.
Perfect. So, in other words, the names of each of the tribes, the Midrash is telling us the names of each of the tribes reflect both a praise of the Jewish people as a whole, and it reflects something about the time of the redemption, future redemption to come. And as we see in this Midrash, the tribe of Asher, which was the leader of the tribe of Asher, brought his sacrifices on the 11th day. Asher is named for the redemption of the Jewish people, as it says in the verse, V'ishru eschem. The Ishru is the same grammatically similar root as the word Asher, which is the tribe of Asher. And that's referring to the time of the redemption. And Asher also refers to praise, as it says, Ashrei ha'am shekach aloi, Asher ha'am she'Hashem elakav. Blessed, Ashrei, or fortunate, is the people of whom this is true, and fortunate is the people whose God is their Lord. Okay. So when Asher brought his sacrifice, the leader of the tribe of Asher brought his sacrifice, he had in mind that he's bringing it, thanking God for choosing Israel from all the nations. And as the verse says, God chose you to be his chosen people. So the Midrash, all right, so what is so blessed about being Jewish? Because the Jews chose God and he chose them. On the 11th day, when Asher brought their offering, it was in honor of that excellent choice. Okay. We're going to ask a question. Very important question. I will let you know that in the original mimer, there's a bunch of more questions that the Rebbe asks, but we're not going to address them. We're not going to bring them up even, because it's going to confuse us right now. Okay, section B, a tough choice. On the 11th day of the month of Nissan, 1971, the Rebbe held a Farbrengen, a Hasidic gathering, in honor of his birthday, and delivered a Hasidic discourse during the event. At the beginning of the discourse, the Rebbe quoted this Midrash about Asher who brought their sacrifice on the 11th of Nissan and analyzes it at length. So let's see the Rebbe's words in the Mimer, Divine Choice, page 5. Stephen, are you able to read?
Yeah, I have to close Zoom in order to do the reading. Where am I? Source 4?
Source, well, source, it's not source, it's page 5.
Okay, I have to close Zoom.
Where it says the Rebbe, Divine Choice.
Okay, true choice can only be between two equal entities, or at least entities that each possess their own unique advantage. How then can it be said that the Jewish people chose God over the foreign idols?
Big question. Thank you, Stephen. The Jewish people needed to choose between the God of the heavens and the earth and some pieces of stone. That was the choice. Not much of a choice. Why is this such a difficult choice? Why are the Jewish people praised for their great wisdom in choosing the creator of the heavens and the earth over some pieces of wood and stone? Some idols. With God on one side and idols on the other, is there really any choice in the matter? So In other words, we're analyzing this midrash as face value. Okay, we get the midrash. It's telling us that Asher is named after the praise of the Jewish people, and it's praising that we chose God and God chose us. Wait, stop. What do you mean we chose God? Choice in Torah means you have two options that are either equal or they each have an advantage over the other. We're talking about God Almighty and pieces of rock and stone and clay. There's no choice. It's not an obvious choice even. It's just there is no choice. Now, do you want to eat ice cream or do you want to eat sand? You have it's not free choice. It's not a choice. Of course you can eat ice cream. Lactose intolerance, different thing, but you're not going to want to eat sand, trust me. So in order to understand this idea that we chose God, what does that mean? We chose Hashem. We're going to delve into what's the word? A metaphor brought in a different area in the Medrash. And this is going to be the basis of tonight's class. Choosing the king over his ministers. The Rebbe is going to bring an additional Medrash regarding a verse in Lamentations that addresses the Jewish people's choice of God. So this is source 3, Lamentations, chapter 3, verse 24. Verse says, Chelki Hashem amar nafshi al kein eichiloi. My soul said, God is my portion. Therefore, I will wait for him. Okay? That's what the verse says. So says the Midrash on this verse. Midrash Eicha Rabbah, this is source 4. Now, here, pay attention to the words of this Midrash. We have to pay attention really well, because if we miss any detail, we're going to get confused later on. Rabbi Abahu said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. This is analogous. Is that how you pronounce it? Did I say it right? Yeah. Okay, analogous. Thank you. My English, This is analogous to a king who enters a state or a country accompanied by a duke, prefect, and a commander. The leaders of the state gathered together, and one said, I will choose the duke as my patron. Another said, I will choose the prefect as my patron. My guest, really. Yet another said, I will choose the commander as my patron or my guest. Then one wise man, a wise person, among them said, I will choose the king. Why? For all the others are subject to replacement, but the king is not. That's the metaphor given by the Midrash. Now the Midrash explains the metaphor. Likewise, idol worshippers bow to the sun or the moon, some to sticks and stones, but the Jews only serve God. As it states, my soul said, God is my portion. For I proclaim his unity twice daily, saying, Hear, O Israel, Lord is our God, Lord is one, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. So here too, the Midrash praises the right choice and the wisdom of the Jews for choosing to serve the Creator and not idols, like the wise person who chose the king and not his officers. Okay. So we bring a Midrash which gives us a picture of this idea, an illustration really, this idea of choosing Hashem, choosing God, in the form of choosing a king over his ministers. Okay. The Rebbe asks on this. Michael, page 6, can you read it?
So wise. Seemingly even a small child knows that the king is greater than any of his officers. Why then does the Midrash specify that a person who chose the king was wise? In addition, even if the officers wouldn't have been subject to replacement, it still should have been clear that the king is greater. Why was this additional reason all that the officers are replaceable needed?
We should all be picking up our shoulders and going like this. In summary, we studied two Midrashic texts which praise the wisdom of the Jewish people in choosing the king, God, not his officers, or not officers, idols. The Rebbe poses the obvious question, why is this such a difficult choice? To the extent that we're saying that the person, in the metaphor, the person who chose the king, he's wise. He's wise? What do you mean? Why would you not choose the king? He's the main dude. So we're going to delve into a long discussion explaining the complications here, examining the different choices, and explaining why indeed this was a wise choice. Okay, section C. In order to understand this, we need to understand and go on a history lesson a little bit, the evolution of idolatry. So to understand the deliberations in choosing God over idols, we must go back to the beginning of history and see how idolatry began. which, if you think about it, if you look in the Torah and look at the beginning of this of the whole book, you follow the story. You should wonder, where did idol worship even pop in from? Like, how did it even happen? Because think about it. Adam was created by God. Okay, he spoke with God directly, and he passed this reality on to his children and their children and so on, and generations that followed. So when did that? What happened there? Right? Where did that information go haywire? When did that end? How did a person get up one day and believe that a statue or some of the celestial bodies is something that's worthy of bowing down to, or even worse, that it's a god, or that it created the world? Okay, so let's see. The idea of waiters. Page 7. Sure, can you read that?
Yes, the way of explaining this is based on the history of idolatry. The initial idolaters recognized that everything ultimately comes from God, not the celestial bodies. Their mistake was that they believed that the celestial bodies exerted choice in serving as conduits for the divine flow reaching this world. They didn't realize that the celestial bodies, in fact, have no choice in the matter, and they're merely like an axe in the hands of a woodchopper. Due to their error, these people worship the celestial bodies because if they have choice in the matter, they deserve appreciation for their role. They also thought that by worshiping the celestial bodies, they would be able to receive more from them.
Okay. Thank you. Humanity during the first generations after creation knew the creation story. It wasn't a belief, it was a fact. This is reality, of course. Where else did we come from? They knew who created the world and what he wanted from them. They were also very, very intelligent, contrary to popular belief, and understood the forces of nature. They knew about the rotations of the planets and how important the light of the sun and moon and other celestial bodies is for the entire earth. At some point, they thought that in addition to praying to God to send us his blessings and thanking him for it, they ought to also thank the sun and the moon and the stars and Mars and Neptune. Why? They gave an analogy. When a person is invited to a festive meal where there's lavish food and drink being served, if they're smart, they're going to tip the waiter at the beginning of the meal. Why would they tip the waiter? Why do you tip a waiter at the beginning of the meal?
Yeah. You
Why?
get more from them.
Huh?
You get more.
Get more from him,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. But shouldn't they be only thanking the host? No. The answer is very simple. True, the waiter follows instructions, but in the course of his job, he can favor one guest over another, right? Giving them warmer food, you can serve them quicker. Therefore, besides thanking the host, it can't hurt to also give the waiter a tip, give him a little appreciation. This is exactly how the world runs, they figured. Yes, God created and runs it, and we pray to him, but since he has waiters, let's say, the sun and the moon, which practically deliver life to the world, it would be fitting to thank them too, because they do have some pull. You can already feel the beginnings of a mistake here. This really is a mistake already. The CEOs, Stephen, can you read page 7? Bottom page 7.
Yeah. This later led to an even greater mistake, thinking that God abandoned the world to the control of the celestial bodies. They compared this to a king who appointed ministers to administer his country. Even though the ministers derived their authority from the king who appointed them, after their appointment, they are the actual rulers of the country, and the king doesn't intervene, except in rare circumstances when there is a great need.
Right. Thanks, David. So mistake number 1 automatically leads to mistake number 2 at some point. They thought that the influence of the sun and the moon was far broader than that. The new theory was that God did indeed create the world, of course, that's without question, but he appointed the celestial bodies to manage it. And he doesn't get involved with every detail. Only on occasion, for very important things, does he personally involve himself, like, for example, to take the Jews out of Egypt, right? If so, certainly they should invest in thanking and praying to these celestial bodies, for they aren't mere waiters, they're CEOs. No? 90% of the time, they're running the whole business. But this led to the next mistake. God is forgotten from the world. Maimonides, the Rambam, describes the evolution of their mistake in greater detail. Source 5, Maimonides, Mishnah Torah, the laws of idol worship. I think we actually mentioned this in a class a few weeks ago. So on page 8. As time passed, false prophets arose among the people and said that God told them to worship this or that celestial body, and they brought offerings and anointed them and built them sanctuaries and replicated their likenesses for all to bow to them, including the women, children, and common folk. They would claim that a form they'd made up was the shape of a certain celestial body that they were shown in their prophecy. In this manner, they began inventing different forms in their sanctuaries, and under trees, and on mountaintops, and in the valleys. They would gather and bow to them, telling the people that this form is responsible for the good and bad, and they should fear it and worship it. The priests would explain that this manner of service will bring success, and do such, and don't do such and such. Other charlatans arose and claimed that this star constellation or angel spoke to them and said, "Serve me like this," told them how to worship them. This phenomenon spread throughout the world, and people began serving strange objects, bowing to them, and bringing sacrifices. Page 9, as time passed, God was forgotten from the face of the earth, and everyone knew of only idol worship, the way they were raised. The priests pretended there was no God, only the idols they formed to represent the various deities. There were only very few people who knew God, such as Chanoch, Mesushelach, Noah, Shem, and Aver. So as we see, the mistake which started small went further and further and further from the truth, and engulfed literally the entire world until like 99.9% of humanity were worshiping idols. Only a very few individuals were still serving God. Mike, read page 9, the clear vision.
This can explain the wisdom in the choice of the king, the Jewish people's recognition of the truth, that all of the intermediaries for which the divine flow reaches us merely like an axe in the hand of a woodchopper, reflects a profound understanding, seeking the deeper truth. Superficially, it would seem that the reason the celestial bodies play a role in the divine flow is because of their greatness, and the Jewish people's recognition that they are merely like an axe in the hand of a woodchopper is due to their great wisdom.
Thank you. It's already been a few thousand years during which God hasn't revealed himself openly in our world. He hasn't split the sea for us recently, last I checked. He hasn't held a rerun of the giving of the Torah at Sinai, right? Looking at the world externally and superficially, we see a world governed by the forces of nature. Perceiving the real truth that God is the creator and ruler and manager of the world and is pulling the strings behind the natural forces requires great wisdom. D, choosing to sacrifice. So in other words, seeing past the facade. The facade is all the result of a very long-winded mistake that went from generation to generation, got worse and worse. That externally it appears that the world is self-managed. Whether you believe in a person believes in some idol is running the world, if there is no anybody running the world, just Mother Nature. When the reality is, and hasn't changed since the creation of the world, that God is the one who's created the world and running the show literally to this tiniest details. And to be able to recognize that takes a great deal of wisdom. Choosing to sacrifice. So until now, we explained that a person needs wisdom to remember that God runs the world, and that all of nature and creation is God's handiwork, and he runs it exactly the way he wants. Now the Rebbe explains a deeper level in the wise person's choice. More than just deeper understanding or sharper insight, it's a choice of sacrifice. Okay, now it's going to get intense. Okay, Shrek, you read page 10. Holiness requires sacrifice.
The main reason why the idolaters worshipped the celestial bodies was because receiving the divine flow from the side of holiness requires self-negation. The idolaters didn't want to practice self-negation, so they worshiped the celestial bodies, for which no self-negation is required. The Zohar states that the flow from the impure side is given freely, demanding no sacrifice from its recipients.
Okay, thank you. Just this word here, self-negation. It's not a good translation. The original word in Hebrew is bitul. I think self-submission would be a better translation, but there's no really good translation for bitul. In order to receive divine flow, a person must nullify themselves. Kabbalah and Hasidic philosophy always stress the importance of self-submission, bitul, as the key to all good. Why? The simplest analogy is a cup. When you want to fill a cup with an expensive wine, you first need to do something really easy. How can you get wine into a cup? What do you need to make sure first about the cup? make sure it's empty, right? If the cup is full, the wine won't be able to go into it. When you go to hear going up a level, when you go to hear a lecture, which you think you can improve your life, whether it's parenting or about marriage, business, if you arrive with a full cup, so to speak, with the attitude that, I know everything, I don't need to hear what this person's saying, and you're smarter than everybody else, you'll never be able to accept what's being said. You won't connect and your life won't improve. This also applies in loftier areas. The Talmud relates that Rabbi Zera was very wise and he would learn Torah in the Babylonian tradition. After many years of study, he decided to go to Israel and learn in the Jerusalem tradition, which was much deeper, but he couldn't understand anything. He was so accustomed to his previous way of learning and trapped in previously held notions, which, though very lofty, weren't at the level of the Jerusalem style of learning. He couldn't free himself from them and advance to a new level. So what did he do? He fasted for 100 days. That's what Talmud says. He fasted for 100 days. He spent 100 days freeing himself from the previous way of learning, and only then did he succeed in understanding the Jerusalem style. When a person wants to advance from level to level, they need bitul, they need self-submission. They need to understand that they don't know everything. Make space for something else. Bitul isn't only for understanding, but also in feeling. In order to make room in your heart for someone else, you can't be full of yourself. You kind of like put yourself out of the way. Not everyone is willing to do that, however. For some people, letting go of their ego is extremely difficult or too difficult. Who is this person? Tell me about marriage. What do they know that I don't? Right? Such people can receive the flow from the negative side, an unholy side. They can accept a pat on the back from others with that kind of ego. They're comfortable in an environment of haughtiness and egoism. They know it all. They have it all. Everything revolves around them. The Zohar, the Holy Zohar, says that the spirit of the profane always rests in a place of emptiness at no cost, meaning there is no demand for hard work. You get it all without any effort. We see this in all areas of life. When you pay, you get, what do they say? You get what you pay for, right? You pay for quality, you get quality. If it's free, that's what it's worth. As the Talmud says, a doctor who costs nothing is worth nothing. Or in today's world, if you aren't paying for a product, then you are the product. Just a side note, the Zohar recommends paying for mitzvahs because nothing good comes from something for free. This is the wise person's choice, the wise people's choice. They are prepared to practice bittul, self-submission, and make an effort to receive the flow from holiness. They aren't tempted to inflate their ego and receive from the negative side. Shver, can you page 10? Holiness gives slowly.
Another reason for preferring the celestial bodies is that the flow that comes through them is greater. This underlines the great wisdom and virtue of the Jewish people who only serve God. Being on the side of holiness demands hard work and effort, and the return is measured commensurate with the work invested. Nevertheless, they willingly give up materialism and prefer to receive the more limited flow from the side of holiness.
Okay. So it stands to reason that something deep and true flows more gradually, step by step. Something shallow flows quicker and in greater volume. Making the right choice requires great wisdom. The wise person needs to nullify their ego and also accept that the holy flow will come more gradually, because things that are deep and true take time. It's very easy to be unholy. Unholy doesn't necessarily mean evil or bad. It's not holy. Well, it is. It doesn't take much effort. On the contrary, it takes very little effort or no effort. To receive from holiness, to have a connection with God, that takes work. Okay? So let's get this straight. To receive from unholy places, an unholy energy, so to speak, it's easy, you get it quicker, and it's more. To receive from holiness, not as quick, it takes time. It takes a lot of hard work, it takes a lot of putting yourself to the side, putting God first. Why would anybody do that? Why would you do that? What benefit is there to me if I choose God over what's not godly? What benefit is there? Let's okay. So what's going on here is we're getting to the core of a Jew here. This is what we're getting at. This is not a logical choice. We're making a choice. We choose God. We have the ability to choose God. But it's not a logical choice, as we'll see in a minute. Self-submission, bittul, is not intuitive. We're naturally all created with an ego and selfish desires. That's normal. Okay. If somebody doesn't have an ego, that doesn't make them doesn't make everybody else less than them. It makes this person extremely abnormal, special. What gives a person the ability and desire to negate himself, to put himself aside and put something else bigger than him first? The answer is, next words on the page, it's the soul. Page 11. Stephen, you here? Okay. Page 11. The Jewish people's willingness to give up personal benefit and choose God is due to their divine soul, which superrationally chooses godliness. This choice is not based on an understanding that godliness is greater because the king isn't replaced, but is an expression of the essential being or character of the soul. This essential identity influences the Jew's logic, causing it to rationally understand that since godliness is the eternal, irreplaceable truth, it is worth setting aside one's selfish identity in order to choose godliness. So at the end of the day, logic can convince a person to transcend their ego and choose the difficult path instead of the easy one. Such a choice is motivated by the soul, which transcends logic. To illustrate, we're actually tell a few stories of people who made costly decisions that have no logical explanations for them. It was a soul decision. The first story is about Viktor Frankl. You know about him. His fateful decision. A short while before the U.S. joined World War II, this is his words. I didn't say this. I was invited by the U.S. Embassy in Vienna to accept my immigration papers. At the time, my elderly parents and I lived in Vienna. They expected that I would take the documents and immediately immigrate. But at the last minute, I began to deliberate. Should I really do this? Can I really do this? I suddenly understood what would happen to my parents. In just several weeks, they'd be sent to a concentration camp, or more precisely, a death camp. Could I leave them to their fate? Until now, I was able to protect them in my position as head of neurology at Vienna's Jewish hospital. If I would leave, the situation would change right away. While I was deciding what the right thing to do would be, I thought this was one of those times where you wish for a sign from heaven. I went home and I saw a piece of marble on the table. I asked my father, not marble cake, by the way, marble. I asked my father how it got there. Victor, I found it this morning at a site which used to be a synagogue, which the Nazis burnt down. Why did you take it? I asked. He answered, because it is a shard of the stones which had the 10 commandments. He showed me a Hebrew letter engraved on the stone. Besides, he continued, this letter is shorthand for one of the 10 commandments. Which one? I asked. He answered, honor your father and mother so that God will give you long life on this earth. At that moment, I decided to stay in Vienna with my parents and forego the opportunity to escape. This story demonstrates the difficulty of making the right and wise choice. Victor chose to remain with his parents instead of escaping the European inferno. Though the price he would pay was clear to him, this strength he received from heaven. It was his soul deciding. He paid dearly, but never regretted it because it was the right thing to do. Like if he stays there, he saves his parents, but they all might die. He leaves, at least he'll survive. But his parents won't. And he made the choice to stay with his parents. Why? Because honor your father and mother. Doesn't make any sense. Logically, he should save himself. They're all going to die anyway. Naturally. But why would he stay? Because it wasn't a logical choice. It was a soul choice. Story number 2. Yuli Edelstein's important question. The former head of the Israeli parliament, Yuli Edelstein, recalls. I'm reading his words. The day was December 19, 1984, the day I was sentenced to 3 years of forced labor in a Soviet camp in southern Siberia. The official verdict stated that it was for harboring illicit substances. But the real reason was for his activities and Hebrew classes that he taught. It was after 3 months in limbo, I arrived to my court hearing. The room was full of police and security officers. Family members are allowed at a regular hearing, but they filled all the seats with officers, so my family had no room to enter. Only my wife and mother managed to come inside. After they handed down my sentence, I was surrounded by security officers waiting to return me to my cell. Somehow I managed to raise my head above the security ring. I had one thing to tell my wife, whom I hadn't seen in 3 months and whom I didn't know when I'd see next. What did he say to his wife? He hasn't seen her in 3 months. And he might never see her again. for his illicit activities. What does he say? What do you think he said this way? I love you. I'll miss you. Take care of the kids. Something. What did he say? Apparently her name was Tanya. Tanya, which candle is it tonight? The Soviets thought I'd lost my mind after hearing my sentence. My wife also did. She didn't understand what I was talking about. So I yelled again, which candle is it tonight? Only on the third try did she understand me. Tonight we light the second candle, she shouted back. Yes, December 19, 1984 was the first day of Hanukkah. I didn't have a Hebrew calendar, but when they said the secular date, I calculated there must be Hanukkah. I wanted to light the Hanukkah candles. Yuli didn't know when he'd see his wife next. He didn't say, I love you or I'll miss you. He said, which candle is it tonight? That night, already in a different cell for sentenced prisoners, Yuli managed to find 2 matches. Opposite the bars on the window, he emotionally recited the blessings to kindle the Hanukkah lights, who has made miracles for our ancestors in those days and in these times, who has preserved us, renewed us, and brought us to this time, and lit the 2 matches. And so, he continued, I stood at the window for several moments until the matches singed my fingers. I don't know if it was a kosher lighting from a perspective of Jewish law, but I know that for me on that night, a little light pushed away a lot of darkness. An incredible story about someone who lives in our times. It's 1984 this happened. It wasn't 3,000 years ago. This isn't Hannah and her 7 sons, not Judah the Maccabee. What made Yuli do this? Why did he decide that the most important thing in his life right then was to know how many candles to light? Because it's something deep within the soul. God is my portion. This is the kind of choice we're talking about. It's the soul's choice. It's an inner voice which whispers the right thing, even if it's not easy or fun. This is what the verse in Lamentations is saying. My soul said, God is my portion. The fact that I choose God is from my soul. It transcends logic. It's illogical sometimes. Thank God most people today don't have to make decisions like Yuli Edelstein and Viktor Frankl. But our lives are full of choices between the right and difficult option or the easy and wrong option. Sometimes it's easy to choose correctly, but other times it can be really hard. We need the strength of our soul to sacrifice, to toil, and to choose right. Let's read section E. This is the last section. We're gonna end up with a story about this idea. Okay. E, choosing between good and better. So this entire time, the Rebbe is taking us on a path of choosing between unholy and holy, between what's wrong and what's right, between physical or metaphorical or ideological idols and God. Now the Rebbe is going to step it up a notch, choosing between good and better. Meaning even within the realm of what's holy and pure, you can either miss the point or get the point. So let's see. The wise pauper's prayer. Michael, can you read the verse from source 6 and also source 7?
A poor man's prayer. Enwrapped, he pours out his words before God. Source 7, Kesser Shem Tov 94. I heard from my master an explanation of the verse, a poor man's prayer. Enwrapped, he pours out his words before God. According to his analogy, the king announced on his day of joy that anyone who requests something from that king will have their request fulfilled. Some request honor, some request wealth, each received their request. One wise man said that his request is to speak to the king 3 times a day. The king favored this request because his speaking was dearer to him than honor or money. He granted permission for the man to enter his chambers to speak to him, with him. And there they would open the king's treasures and allow him to take from there as well. This is the meaning of the verse, the poor man's prayer to pour out his words. Speaking with God is the poor man's request.
Okay, pause there. Thank you, Michael. So this is a teaching from the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, based on a verse in Psalms. It says, a poor man's prayer, enwrapped, he pours out his words before God. The Baal Shem Tov explains the verse on a deeper level. What is the simple meaning? Simple meaning is a poor man's prayer. He's wrapped in a talit, and a prayer shawl, and he pours out his words before God. Lifnei Hashem yishpoch sicho. The Baal Shem Tov translates the verse a little differently. Tefillah la'ani, the poor man's prayer, kiyatuf, when he's wrapped. What is his prayer? His request is lifnei Hashem yishpersicha, that he should be able to pour his words before God. That is his request. It's not telling you that it's not an opening. It's not only an introduction that he's praying. He's pouring out his words before God. This is what he said, and the psalm continues. No, there's a deeper meaning too, which means that he's asking God, "Let me pour out my soul to you. I want to be able to speak to you." And he gives the analogy. The king says, "Anybody, come get whatever you want. Ask me for anything." One guy comes and says, "Oh, I want $1 million." Oh, no problem. Here's $1 million. One guy says, "Oh, I want to wear your royal clothes." No problem. Wear the royal clothes. One person says, "I want the fanciest foods in the face of the planet." No problem. Make it available to you. This poor man walks in and says, "I want to be able to speak to you 3 times a day." He looks at this guy and goes, "You got it. You got the point." They all missed the point. You got it. Go ahead, page 13, the Rebbe.
Yeah. And a verse in Psalms states, a prayer for a poor man when he wraps himself and pours out his speech before God. The Baal Shem Tov interprets this verse as saying that the poor person doesn't ask God for anything. All he prays for is that his speech should be before God. The Baal Shem Tov says that this requires great wisdom. He compares it to a visitor to a physical king who, on his way to the king's chamber passes through many rooms, each of which holds great treasures. Some people see the great treasure in the outer hall and enjoy it so much that they stop to spend some time there. Others have this experience when they reach the halls further in the palace. But the truly wise person pays no attention to all the treasures of even the innermost hall, because all he desires is to enter the king's chamber and see the king's face.
Thank you. The poor person is given a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to enter the king's palace and take whatever he wants. One person will choose to take home a large amount of money. Another will choose to partake in a gourmet meal. The third one wants a beautiful concert. But the wise man will rise above all the distractions and focus on the ultimate goal, meeting the king himself. The Alter Rebbe's yearning. This is source 8. There's one more source, actually. Okay. It's from Psalms chapter 73, verse 25. And Rashi's comment on that, which is, "Who do I have in heaven besides you? And on earth I desire no one but you." Rashi, the famous commentator, says, "Who do I have in heaven? I haven't chosen any angel as a god. I have chosen only you." So King David in this psalm, he's praying to God and declares that he wants nothing on heaven or earth, not material things, nor an angel, only God. Second. This, says the Rebbe, this love for God is like that described by the verse, "Who do I have in heaven besides you? And on earth I desire no one but you." The founder of the Chabad movement, the Alter Rebbe, once expressed this feeling. And I'll say it to you in Yiddish first, because the Yiddish, I know you're not going to understand what I'm saying, but the Yiddish has the richness to it. He said, "Ich will ze gar nicht. Ich will nicht dein Gan Eden. Ich will nicht dein Olam Haba. Ich will mir nicht as dich allein." I want nothing at all. I don't want your paradise. I don't want your world to come. All I want is you yourself. The revelations experienced in paradise and the world to come are incredibly profound. And the Alter Rebbe understood this very well. Yet he didn't want any of these revelations of godliness. All he yearned for was God himself. The spiritual worlds are awash with divine revelation, from which the soul can derive immense spiritual pleasure. Infinite spiritual pleasure. But the Alter Rebbe would declare that he won't make do with any great spiritual level. All he wants is a relationship with God alone. This is the choice of the truly wise person. It's not just a choice between pure and impure, comfort and justice. Even within the realm of holiness, one needs to be able to choose between good and better, between the holy experience in paradise and the direct relationship with God himself. So it seems that we're talking about very lofty levels with which we don't have any connection with. It's like godly people stuff here. If we dig deeper, we'll see that this is present in our daily lives as well. So let's read this very fascinating story. Second. We have the next, this last
We
page.
can too.
I just want to see like what's. Oh, this is the thing. So. Fine. Okay. I'm going to read this story. It's a 2-chunk story. And then we'll finish off. The British student's decision. This is a story told by Rabbi, I'll say his full title, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, who's a famous lecturer, professor, rabbi, who just recently passed away in the last year or two. Very warm, very deep person, very intellectual person, very loving person, very respected and respectful. Wonderful, wonderful man. This is his story and how he came to be who he was. And this is his words. I think this was from an interview. I was in my 20s. I was studying philosophy. I'd written my doctorate. I had studied for rabbinic ordination and had been ordained. I felt this was it. I had done what I needed to do as a Jew, and now I can continue on with my life's plans. And then I went to meet the Rebbe to seek his advice on my future plans. My Chabad friends told me exactly what to do. Write your questions on a paper, give the Rebbe 3 options, 1, 2, and 3. The Rebbe will choose an option from those which you present him with. That's what they told him. So I set out my options. I said to the Rebbe, I have a career in front of me. I have 3 choices. Number 1, maybe I'd like to be an academic. Perhaps one day I would be a professor, maybe a fellow of my college in Cambridge. Or number 2, I went to university initially to study economics. I'd like to be an economist. Or number 3, I'd like to be a barrister, an advocate. I was a member of one of the Inns of Court, the inner temple where you study to be a lawyer. I don't know how British stuff works, but that's what I'll just take his word for it. I went into the Yechidus, the private audience, not knowing what the Rebbe would answer. Would it be 1? Would it be 2? Or would it be 3? The Rebbe looked at me and he went through the list. Not 1, not 2, not 3. I thought, hang on, it's against the rules. 1 second. The Rebbe did not give me time to reply. He told me Anglo Jewry was short of rabbis, and therefore he said to me, you must train rabbis. He specified Jews College, where rabbis were trained in Britain. And then he said, you yourself must become a congregational rabbi, so that your students will come and they will hear you give sermons. They will hear you give sermons and they will learn. He said you will train rabbis and you will become a rabbi. Well, I was a little farblunged, a word which I've introduced into the English language courtesy of the BBC, apparently. But if the Rebbe says to do it, I did it. Farblunged means like confused and lost. I gave up my 3 ambitions. I trained rabbis. I taught in Jews College. Eventually, I became head of Jews College. And I became a congregational rabbi in Golders Green and Marble Arch. So this is the story of Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks in his own words. Before we read the second part of the story, let's analyze it a little bit. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks is a good Jew. His entire life ahead of him. All his options, whether to be an academic, an economist, or a lawyer, were good options, and he could have lived a happy and fulfilling life. But when he consulted with the Rebbe answered that he must choose not only what's good for him, but what will be good for the Jewish community, what God wants from him. Thus, he should become a rabbi. For him, it was a rabbi, but other people not necessarily need to become a rabbi, and educate other rabbis. The Rebbe requested that despite all his perfectly good options, he should choose a holier option, even though it would be harder for him. Perhaps this is the message from the poor man's prayer, where he insists on meeting the king and doesn't suffice with palace treasures. Although many good options come before us, we need to always search for the holiest and best objective. In the long run, the Rebbe assures us that those that make the hard choice will also receive material benefit. Just like the Baal Shem Tov's parable, where the poor man who insisted only on speaking with the king eventually received great treasures to take home with him. When we insist on fulfilling God's greatest expectations from us and make the right choices, God will eventually reward us with a shower of blessings in the physical sense as well. Let's continue the story now, and then we'll end off the class tonight. This is what ultimately happened with Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, in his words. A funny thing happened. Having given up all my 3 ambitions, having decided to walk in the complete opposite direction, a funny thing happened. I did become a fellow of my college in Cambridge. I did become a professor. In fact, this year, I guess when he was interviewed, I have 3 professorships, 1 in Oxford University and 2 in London University. I did deliver Britain's top 2 economics lectures, the Mays lecture and the Hayek lecture. An inner temple made me an honorary barrister and invited me to give a law lecture in front of 600 barristers, the Lord Chancellor, the highest lawyer in Britain, and Princess Anne, who's the master. You know, you never lose anything by putting Yiddishkeit first, by putting Judaism first. And I learned something very deep. Sometimes the best way of achieving your ambitions is to stop chasing after them. Let them chase after you. Let's finish off the mimer, page 14, we can too. Michael, can you take a crack at that?
The fact that the Alter Rebbe said this, and his grandson and successor, the Tzemach
Tzemach Tzedek, it's a little hard to say.
I'll take your word for that, publicized it, empowers every Jew, especially those that follow the path of the Rebbe, to have this same feeling. We all have many desires, including materialistic desires, but they can be pursued dispassionately, while our main desire is to fulfill God's deepest wish, that this world become a home for God. Even our material desires can be channeled towards the purpose of tunneling the mundane into a vehicle for the spiritual.
Okay. Thank you. The Alter Rebbe empowers us not to make do with our mundane desires, even with our spiritual ones. Even with our spiritual ones, we can aim for the highest aspiration of all, doing what God wants from us, making this world a holier place. Shrek, can you finish off at page 15, the bottom of the wise person gains?
Living with this mindset will also bring us great physical blessings. The Alter Rebbe says that God gives us physical matters, and we make them spiritual. And when we receive abundant physical blessings, we generate abundant spiritual blessings, abundant in both quantity and quality. This should all happen with a gladness and joy during the period of preparation for Pesach, a festival of freedom. May this freedom lead us to the freedom and redemption by our righteous Mashiach freely in our days.
Thank you. So this discourse, this mimer, became one of the fundamental teachings of Chabad. Everybody learns it, especially at this time, the Rebbe's birthday. The Rebbe's birthday is in 11 days from tonight. Perhaps it's because it expresses everything the Rebbe demanded of each of us. Not just me, you, Stephen, my father-in-law, and everybody else who was watching this later on. He demanded from his followers to leave the comforts of their communities and leave everything behind and go open a Chabad center at the other end of the world, even if they won't have easy access to kosher food or local Jewish education for their children, because this is what God wants. Even from regular people, he demanded they forego different opportunities in order to find another Jew to wrap tefillin with or invite for Shabbat, because that is what God wants. The Rebbe asks us to make the wise choice. Not only must we remember that God runs the world, not only must we choose holiness even when it's hard, but even within holy pursuits, we must choose the loftiest objective for which we were created and which God expects of us. I'd like to just one small thing, which I think will be very interesting in hearing. So as we learned in the beginning, this was a mimer said by the Rebbe on his birthday in 1971. The Rebbe said this in Yiddish originally. Second. The Rebbe said this in Yiddish, and I think it'd be very interesting to hear the Rebbe, at least for just a minute, saying this mimer that we just learned. You're not going to understand what he's saying, and it's recorded from 1971, so the audio is not so clear, but I still think it's important to listen to it at least.
Das ist genommen von Osher, von der Hashem gelassen, shall be thrown, was is also the issue aspect. Okay, well, Hagim, then also as stated. That is a membership, I guess, where the Torah shall be thrown, as you have aged in Bakodish Dorfu, in the Hashon, supposed to the Hashon, Kasten, of Tavayo, but so.
Okay. That's for tonight's class. Questions, comments, jokes?
It's beautiful.
Any questions? It's the kind of thing I think that takes a little to digest, and then in a week and a half from now, I say, I got a couple questions. Okay. Thank you everyone for coming. And the recording will be up on YouTube, hopefully by tomorrow morning. Let's stop the recording over here. Done. Stop.